Hey, our word for the week is impossible. And I want to preach from the book of Revelation. I at least want to read a little bit of the book of Revelation. And some of you were thinking, I didn't think 2020 could get weirder, but here we go. All right? So here's Revelation chapter 21. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God among mortals. God will dwell with them as their God, and they will be God's people. And God will be with them. God will dry every tear from their eyes, and death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away." And the one who was seated on the throne said, "See, I am making all things new." And God said, "Write this, for these words are trustworthy and true." And then said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water as a gift from the spring of the water of life. Those who conquer will inherit these things, and I will be their God, and they will be my children." The book of Revelation freaks a lot of people out, and I just want to acknowledge maybe why. It's part of a type of literature, a genre of literature that gets called apocalyptic. And for those who sort of have stuff and maybe have safety and maybe have power, it is terrifying to think that the whole apple cart might get turned upside down and that disorder would throw the established order out, and we would lose our security, we would lose our wealth, we would lose what we have, we would lose our power. That is terrifying. And so the book of Revelation has been very scary for many Americans in the past couple centuries. But I just want to remind you that originally, to that first century audience, maybe the second century audience, it was often put in something that we might call the literature of the oppressed. And the reason that it's written in such an odd code is because when you are not free to say what you really think, you have to speak in code. That's why the book is written with like 7 horns and 7 crowns and monsters and galactic women and cosmic creatures and the sea and explosions and the sky changes, right? And stars fall and angels speak. The reason you have to speak in code is when you're not safe or free to say what you really think. But I want to tell you this. The book of Revelation might never have been more relevant to us than it is right now. Because the book of Revelation, its hope is if you don't like how things are going, it wants you to imagine that the world can be a different way and work a different way. How that expectation works. If you don't like how things are going, can you imagine them a different way? So our word for the day is impossible. And we live in a time where many of the conversations that I am able to listen in on or able to have with people, the word impossible or something similar to it keeps showing up. For instance, if you had told me a year ago that something would happen by which we could actually press pause on the entire economy, I would have likely have said to you, that's impossible. This machine is so big and it is rolling so fast, there is zero possibility of it ever being brought to a halt. And yet, the impossible has happened around the globe. And it's had an environmental impact. If you had told people who are working on ecological concerns and about environmental justice that something would happen by which pollution levels would come down, and whether it's Los Angeles or Dubai or wherever it is, or in India, that pollution levels would come down and that some of the effects of industrial society would be turned back environmentally, they would have said, it seems impossible. We can't even get countries to agree to the Paris Agreement or whatever it is, right? No one's willing to make any adjustment because they say, well, what if we do it, but then we lose out economically to this other country which won't do it? It's impossible. And yet here we are. Medically, many of us have gotten used to medicine being very reliable and constantly improving. And we haven't had to worry about some of the same things that our parents were so devastating in our parents' generation because of vaccines. And we're used to there being a shot or a pill for nearly everything. And for the medical funding to be there, and even our debates about medical insurance, right? But they assumed a certain competency and success level of medical. And what has happened has exposed some flaws in our medical system that seem impossible. And some of the numbers that are being reported for this pandemic, each new day in the United States, it makes you shake your head. You think, this is impossible. I mean, I can go on and on. Let's talk politics. Some of you, on one hand, may have been saying for the last 3.5 years that this guy as our president seems impossible. Or if you come from a background like me, to say, my former tribe, the white evangelicals, are by far this immoral guy's biggest support base. That seems impossible. But others of you are thinking, how is it that our choice for this next presidential election is two 70-year-old white guys? That seems impossible. And others of you are thinking, how is socialism back? I thought that went away in the 60s and 70s. How is this now back with young people? That seems impossible. We could talk about Black Lives Matter and the fact that the whitest city in America, which is what Portland is known as, is now the home for the Black Lives Matter. It's the most prominent protest site for the Black Lives Matter. Washington Post yesterday, one of the advocates from Portland, she wrote that there's now more Black Lives Matter signs in Portland than black people. Right? This seems impossible. And now there are federal agents in Portland having a standoff? What is happening? This seems impossible. Should I go on and on? Statues are coming down around the country. Confederate flag has been banned from NASCAR. The NFL team in Washington is going to change its racist name. I didn't think any of this would ever happen. It all seems completely impossible. But we live in an impossible moment. So there's a conversation I want to have with you. I want to ask you a question. If you could imagine the world a different way, which is what the community that wrote the book of Revelation wanted you to do, is imagine the world could be a different way. As long as we live in an impossible moment, what would you like to find possible? Is there something that weighs on your heart or something that makes your imagination come alive? Is there something that you never thought you could dream of? It seemed impossible. That as long as the apple cart is upturned and we're sort of rewriting not just our history, but reimagining how our society works, as long as everything's mixed up anyway, is there something that you would like to see as possible? Is there some way that you would like to be in the world that you didn't know or think would ever be possible? I'm going to break this into two littler questions, two smaller questions. One, if you like how things are going, what role does your Christian imagination play in that? Because one of the things I think we have not talked about enough as church communities is the role of Christian imagination, that things can be a different way. For churches like ours, who in the 1950s were so prominent, right? We were the largest Protestant denomination. And that's how we got the moniker, the main line, right? It's because we were the main line of the Protestants in America. Our values so matched our surrounding culture that many of our ministries migrated outside the walls of the church and are now just what we call culture. And so it's caused an identity crisis in us to say, but what role does the church have? And what's happened is, for many of us, progressive or liberal types, we've been relegated to being riding piggyback or getting behind causes that start outside our church communities and just letting Jesus fuel, right? So our Christian imagination simply fuels what we're already doing, but it doesn't initiate it. It just helps it along. And that's fine. And if that's what we need to talk about, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how we put our Christian imagination to good use to support those who are doing real work outside the walls of the church. And if that's our ministry, I'm fine with that. But there's a part of me that wonders if we, together, can dream a dream of the world being a different way that doesn't simply have our Christian faith use it as fuel for what's already happening, but actually helps us to imagine or paint a picture of the world being a different way that is actually inspired by our Christian faith. That it initiates our imagination. It sparks our imagination in a unique way. And I don't know if that's possible, but I know that there are things happening I never thought would happen. Some of what's happening in our society, good and bad right now, I thought was impossible. So it's got me thinking, hey, as long as we're rewriting history, and as long as we're reorganizing ourselves, and as long as we are reimagining what culture and society and neighborhood can look like, what do you want to be possible? That's what I'd like to hear you talk about. But
I think it's sadly lacking.
One more person? If not, I'll go. I would like to go try 50 years of matriarchy. I say we just turn everything over to women for 50 years. It can't go worse than this. And I'll bet you amazing things would happen in 50 years. I would just like to try it. I think a complete inverse of whatever we've been doing. That's what I'm interested in.
We have enough women, we could do that. There's a lot of women.
That's true. I know.
10 years would be good.
You know what else I would like to see? I would like to see all churches give 10% of their income to the tribe whose land their church building sits on. All right. I'm dreaming big these days. Okay. Hey, I want to honor your time